Today on A Couple of Pointers podcast, we're lucky enough to have Jack Knight, BDR lead at Forth and co-founder of Callblitz. Welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me on.
Mate, I'm really excited for a few reasons. One, as you know, we like to talk to people that are operational. Like you're doing this on a daily basis. You're going to be able to tell us what's working, what's not working, and what you're seeing. But I also just want to chat about Callblitz. That's some amazing technology.
Yeah, trenches, right? And a lot goes on in the trenches. And I think LinkedIn, the way we make LinkedIn look with tips and tricks and all this translates to the trenches can be very different. So it's to check in with you and talk about that a bit. And
Nobody wants to put on LinkedIn how like the reality is that they're not checking this, or that they're still using this lazy approach, or that this lazy approach that isn't best practice is still highly effective. Because you know, if you put that out on LinkedIn, the gurus are going to go wild.
100%. Yeah. I also think, you have people in pockets in very different industries having a lot of success. How to translate to a completely different industry, completely different context. So I'm all for LinkedIn tips, all for the info sharing. Big asterisk next to it that it depends.
Now, something else super interesting about you that most other BDR leaders in the world that I speak to don't have, you've got reps in different countries. And I really want to dive into that because we've got reps in different countries. And even on the same account, we're just getting wildly different experiences. Well, let's dive in there. Let's start at this international expansion phase. Tell me some of the big Well, firstly, let's start. Which countries are you managing your reps in?
So we've got a US team. I think we've got about 7 reps on our US team. We've got 3 in the UK. 1 is a manager, coach, mostly coach, but a little bit of player on the side. And then 1 lone rep in Australia. And he covers our APAC region. So wildly spread out. Literally every time zone is covered. And it can be a lot to manage at once.
What's your work schedule like? That sounds inhospitable with the normal lifestyles.
So fortunately, our leader in the UK is amazing. She does great work. And so I'm able to her run that shop without me being super involved, right? Supportive, we're there for coaching, training, that kind of stuff. Really has that team squared away to where they don't need much hand holding at all. For APAC BDR, because he's alone, he doesn't have a manager, he's literally alone, have to be flexible with his time zone. And usually that means staying past 5 p.m. for a one-on-one. Super worth it to see him, to connect. Personally, I'm waking up at 4:30 a.m. every morning, and that's what we're doing out here.
Wow. And is that because you want to take a cold shower, do some Wim Hof breathing, get to the gym and meditate for 4 hours, or is that because of time zone and work?
I'm too scared of the Wim Hof stuff. But no, I do wake up with a shock wrist watch. So at 4:30, I get a nice little shock. Yeah.
Wait, honestly, the world of sales is fucking bizarre. Like, this is where people, here's my team's shirt.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it. It's all backwards. So it says BDSM, unsubscribe is my safe word. And BDSM is business development, sales, and marketing.
That's hilarious. Love it. Yeah, there's an extra edge to people in sales, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So now tell me the difference between, give me some examples of things that you really found success in the US market and it didn't translate so well to either the UK or Australia.
There's a few dynamics here, right? The first thing is the market at large. So in the US, especially in our industry, our market is massive. We're reaching out to hospitality, so hotels, restaurants. In the US, I mean, everywhere. There's so many leads, so many prospects, so many accounts. Whereas for our APAC rep, there's a large addressable market, right? You're talking about the entire hospitality infrastructure of APAC. But where do you focus? And that approach is very much more of an enterprise sale, to the tune of his outbound goal, 1/3 of our US reps outbound goal. So the way they approach their accounts is just a very different approach. Their relationships with their AEs are very different. So there's a difference, right, with the playbook and the industry and everything. One of the more differences to think about, though, is cultural differences, right? And especially when it comes to US, we have a very different tone than Australia, for example. In Australia, I was talking to my rep, he said it's very casual. Like, Australians do not like salespeople. So, you're saying cheers, hey mate, like all this kind of stuff, and it's very casual. US, we can be a little more buttoned up. APAC, though, when you're reaching out to Japanese leads, very professional and very corporate. So interesting, that dynamic of how you speak to your market.
Yeah, it really is. And we're seeing that all over when people come to APAC. You know, one of my classics is the merge field for first name. Occasionally, depending on your motion, you might be doing a bit more of a bulk approach for some things, and you might need to use a merge field for first name. Occasionally, you don't have first name because it's not scrapable of LinkedIn. Sometimes it's like just their initial, that's all you can pull. In Australia, we merged that with mate. So it'll be like, hey mate, whereas in the US, it would be like, hey there, or, you know, something else. Anyway, tell me about the UK. Right, because I obviously know Australia really well. We've got reps in the US. We see the same as what you're talking about. Where does the UK land?
Yeah, in the middle, right? UK, there's a certain polish, especially, you know, me coming from America, speaking American out here, there's a polish in the UK that we don't have. But they also don't like salespeople. So how do you balance this like respectful but human approach? I think that's where the UK is in the middle. Whereas, you know, again, it's more formal. And I think US would get away with some casualty.
Yeah, and it's really important this because so much of the advice that we see on LinkedIn comes from the US and it doesn't translate to the whole world. If you're prospecting in Spain, for example, on a cold call, and you don't ask someone how their day is, or in France, and you don't ask them how their day is going, like it could be considered really rude. That's not how their society works. Whereas in the US, you ask someone how their day is going, you've got an increased likelihood of being hung up on.
So true. And it's interesting, but it's important that we note those differences.
Now, do channels differ? Are you primarily phone-based in the US?
Yeah, we try to go multi-channel, right? Best practice, multi-channel, you're diversifying your risk, your name is more familiar to your prospect, all of that. But yes, definitely heavier in the phones in the US. I think international laws are a little more complex and they're a little more limiting, especially when you get into the UK for GDPR type stuff. Like there's just a whole nother layer of bureaucracy around that. So yeah, US, we're able to turn and burn the phones. APAC is more of an enterprise motion. So yeah, you're going to be calling, but you're also going to be working those multi-channels. And of course, UK is probably a hybrid of that.
Yeah, we find that, it really is different country to country. And interesting that you find this broadly more sophisticated enterprise type approach in Australia or in APAC, because we're finding the same. By default, we're running like account-based marketing, what the US would call account-based marketing plays. Whereas for us, that's just our market.
Exactly.
Tell me now, let's talk about your Australian rep. You've got a lone wolf. Now, he's lucky enough to have a lot of infrastructure and support around you. What do you think his challenges were relative to, say, hiring a rep on your team of 7 in the US?
That is a great question, and it has multiple answers. One answer is what you just said. Doing this job is hard enough. When you're going outbound, when you're trying to develop business, sales, it's a freaking hard job. But at least you have teammates around you. At least you have people that are embracing the suck with you in the trenches. My lone wolf rep in Australia, he doesn't have that. Now, he has great account manager support. He's mapped one-to-one our Australian rep, and they tear it up together. I mean, he gets mentorship, he gets support, encouragement, but it's different than having a peer that relates to you and understands the day-to-day. So I think he misses out on a lot of that, and we can't even schedule team meetings. It makes sense for him to join. It just doesn't make sense. So big con for sure. And then I think one of the other things that he might miss out on, and what we're trying to fix with our one-on-ones, is how do we get him into the same program as the rest of the team, UK and US, in terms of coaching, data, what you said, infrastructure, reporting, so that we can start to coach from a consistent place instead of, I have no idea what you're doing over there, no idea how to coach you. I need to be able to bring him into the fold and say, okay, it's going to look different, but at least I've got you in the fold so that we can start to support you that way.
So you've got 8 reps directly underneath you, plus another 3 that fall into the UK, which has a strong manager. How often are you doing one-on-ones?
US, we do weekly one-on-ones, and UK, I'm only meeting with the manager over there. So she completely oversees and manages those relationships one-to-one. They do a Friday meeting. I try to jump on that sometimes just to say hi and let them know I'm there for them. But for the most part, one-on-ones with the US, one-on-one with the manager in the UK, and then my Australian rep.
Then what does your training program look like beyond ramp? So a rep's been in the game 6 months now. And at that stage, what is their weekly or monthly training cadence typically?
That's a really good question, because it can depend on the rep, and it can also depend on the team and what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. In general, for a weekly coaching cadence, and when I have a team that hits that 6-month maturity mark, what I would like to do is I set up a 2-on-1 training with my more tenured reps, because they can start to coach each other. And what I do is, like, the first sessions, I'll show them how to coach each other, what data we're looking for, and then I'll slowly start to fade out. 4 weeks later, I'm not on those meetings anymore. They're coaching each other, coming to me with the results, and I'm there to validate, yeah, that looks like a good action plan for the week. And now, not only do my reps have each other's support in that, now they're coaches, like, actually know how to coach each other. And just naturally, because of that, they're going to start to be able to help each other out. And I'm able to replicate myself.
So this is really exciting. I love this concept. If you don't mind, I just want to tear in a little bit. So you're building up your reps to coach other reps. How do you prevent it from becoming a talk fest? Like, this is one of the challenges. You get team members on a call. They've been grinding on the phones. You get them together and it turns into a good laugh, which is nice for team building. How do you keep on agenda? Make sure when they rock up to those calls, it's training.
Because we're fully remote, I'm okay with a session turning into a good laugh. And I'm okay with them chit-chatting to a point, right? So to answer your, they are required to coaching scorecard at the end of each one of these sessions. So they have to fill out, what is my weekly focus area? And they're looking at data, conversion rates of how many people they're reaching out to, reply rates, all of this data. So they're supposed to pick one focus area out of all of that data, and then one thing differently. I call it the weekly impact goal. I don't want you to walk away from training with 3 or 4 different things you need to work on. That's too much. You're going to forget it. I want you to pick one thing you're going to do different this next week, and then the week after, we're going to check on that. How did it go? So they are required to fill that out, and when they show up on our Monday training or Monday team meeting, I have them all quickly share what their weekly impact goal is. So if they don't have one, you kind of look silly.
Now, do you call it a weekly impact goal or do you call it a week?
Done.
Yeah. Right. It's a TLA. It's a 3-letter acronym. You've got to use it.
Never thought of that.
Right. I love it. I really do love this approach. And I think this is what you get from having consistent BDR leadership. What I'm struggling with in the industry at the moment is how many reps are just reporting to founders, reporting to VPs of sales, where they've just thrown in a team of AEs and be like, your job within the sales cycle is calling, top of funnel, and the AEs are there to kind of guard them, almost the way you'd, coach your cleaner and how you like them to clean your house. Like, what impact have you seen coaching have on the outcomes for your business?
If you can show someone their potential, if you can help them fulfill their potential, outside of work aside, results aside, if you can encourage someone, empower them, get them to start thinking for themselves, that person is a different person in a month, in 2 months, in 3 months, and that effect compounds. So if you take time to invest in coaching, you're going to get an exponential return on your investment. And I think where we drop the ball with coaching is we just expect our reps to go figure it out. Like you're saying, a lot of companies are doing this. Let me hire an outbound function. But if you don't actually train them, all you have is a team of people plugging in phone numbers and hitting call and getting hung up on. So to your point, we have to invest. We have to coach our reps to get the most potential out of it.
Are your team using Callblitz?
We do. It's a little fun as the creator of it. So what we do with Callblitz on our team is we have a weekly team Callblitz. We've got a 30-minute session in the morning, 30-minute session in the afternoon, once a week. That's the only requirement I give to them. Outside of that, they're welcome to use it whenever they want, with whoever they want. So we're starting to see BDRs call with each other, and we're starting to see AEs and BDRs actually jump on together and do some dial sessions.
Oh, I like that. And
biased, and I do not want to cramp our team culture like, oh, we got to go use Blitz, and if they have any negative feedback, oh, we can't go tell Jack, our boss too. Like, there is that dynamic.
I love how you've brought it in now. We've started doing team call blocks, and same thing, I had to really try to bring it in the right way because it can have such a tremendous cultural impact. And we kind of made it optional. We also kind of didn't, but I don't even know when they are. As in, like, I'm not invited to them. And I've tried to make sure that they realize that a call block is meant to be team building, team bonding, training, all the good side of it, but there's no stick. It's not about keeping you accountable, having someone watch your quality. things like that. Like, we don't need the call blitz for that. I can just see your stats in your call recorder. Have you found that those call blitzes in general, not your software, we can talk about that separately, but have you found that collective calling has seen an uplift in performance or morale?
Yes, this question, I asked them if they've ever been on an in-person sales floor. And the answer is usually yes, because, COVID was only, 2 years ago, and it's only been somewhat recent. The industry at large has worked fully remote. So most people have had that experience of being on a live sales floor. Well, as soon as I bring that up, you start to get this melancholy feeling. You get this like, oh yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, it was fun. Like, we had a whiteboard, we had, the gong, maybe a bell you ring. Like, it's just fun. It's exciting. But beyond that, it's the natural osmosis that happens when you're with your team, rubbing elbows. Whether you like it or not, you're going to be overhearing phone calls all day. Of course it's going to make you better. Of course it's going to open up conversations where, hey, why did you open that way? Or, hey, I've never heard that talk track before. Oh, do you want to practice it real quick? Like, that organic learning, you will never beat the in-person sales floor for cold callers. And I'm very passionate about that because I had such a good experience entering sales out of college, starting on a live sales floor. When we went remote, we lost that. Right? And we were all forced alone in our dark apartments during COVID, and it sucked. It was awful. And, trying to jump on a Zoom together works somewhat. That's why I built CallBlitz. It's cold calling for remote sales teams. Whether you use CallBlitz, you need to be bringing your team together to learn from each other, to do it with each other, because it's a cultural impact. It's a collaboration, and it's a coaching tool. Just having your team together, cold calling. So, I've seen teams who have had no cold calling culture start to be able to build one, even in a remote setting. And I've seen expert cold callers be able to leverage a tool like that to get even better.
It's really remarkable, I think, what can be done with it when it's brought in well. And there's a lot of logistical challenges with doing remote call blocks. It's hard to be distracted whilst trying to focus. It's hard to listen to 5 people talking in your ear whilst you waiting for the first second of a connect, right? So like, the technical enablement that CallBlitz or tools like it bring is so essential to being able to do a remote session with a team and not have it a bloody painful experience or adversely impact the quality of your calling, which is counterproductive.
Yep. Especially when we were early on and our performance wasn't there. We've seen them say like, hey, love the concept, but this is actually hurting our productivity because we're dealing with load speeds. We're dealing with clicking buttons, reps going back and forth, being distracted. And so we've been able to move the tool in a position now where everything's automated, everything is out of the way. So your job, if you're a cold caller, is to call. And oh, by the way, if you want to listen to your team's calls, one click away to be able to listen to your team's calls.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when I first saw the product and I was like, but like, this, without this one thing, we can't use it. And you're like, interesting that you say that. Look at this one button to click. And I was like, wow, okay. You've clearly had like input from actual cold callers and cold calling teams to build this tool out, because the one thing that you had built solved the one problem that I had.
And it's really fun getting to build a thing that you actually need and you actually use. Because I was sitting in a remote team on a Zoom trying to cold call, and that's where this idea came. Like, why don't we do Zoom for cold calling, but better? So it's been fun watching it develop over the past year and getting to use it with my team now. It's a blast.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit more, say, on calling for a rep to become a genuine expert. Are you hiring experienced or unexperienced reps to begin with?
We are in a comp position where we're not at the top of the range. We're not at the bottom by any means. We're average, right? So I sell some people into joining our team just through, sales skills or whatever. But the reality, we're looking at the average range. So we're going to be able to bring in talent that matches that expectation, right? So college grads, maybe a year or two of BDR experience. We lucked out with our 2 latest hires. They're both incredible. One's former military experience and sales experience, and the other, he's just like entrepreneur. He's got many things on the side that he's doing successfully. So long story short, we're bringing in the best we can at the comp range we're at. But I believe in the 10,000 hour rule, especially for cold calling. I think most things you can actually get pretty good at relatively quickly with time, consistency. But cold calling, every time you send that outbound call, you have no idea what's waiting on the other side. You're always going to have cold calling anxiety, always. It's just going to be a thing. It's how you manage it, it's how you deal with it. But yeah, I think it takes a long time to truly master cold calling. One of the only people I know that has mastered cold calling is Kevin Hop. He's on LinkedIn, you may know him.
Yeah. Hop on with Kevin or something like that.
Hop on calls with Kevin Hop.
He's working with Ronen, doing some good work.
Yep, he's actually, he's the Call Blitz member as well. We call him our chief cold caller.
Ah, cool.
Call block 2 weeks ago, and he's in Call Blitz, and I'm explaining to him like Call Blitz strategies, stuff like that. Making dials, so he's talking to me while he's dialing. And my man is sitting here making a sandwich in his kitchen the whole time. And he gets a call, and he starts talking to this prospect. Didn't miss a beat. I was like, he's good at cold calling. That is an expert right there.
Yeah. One of my challenges, even this podcast is difficult for me because I need to walk and talk. So I'm like circling around the dining room table. You know, so much so that my wife bought me a treadmill desk because she was like, Ricky, I can't have you fucking walking around. I can't stand this. Right. Yeah. And so even in cold calling, I have to walk. I have to be mobile. Tell me, here's something I've noticed with cold calls. They start off with bad technique, asking things like, how you doing, whatever the problem is. They then go through this transformation where they start getting really technical, watching the words that they say. They then start getting really confident because they're having some success and this is becoming a bit more normal for them. And they start relaxing their language again, almost to the point that they were right at the beginning, except now they're successful.
So true. I've never heard it explained that way, but I 110% agree. Example with Kevin. If you brought a new hire in and you asked them to go cold call, they're sitting at their desk, frozen, shaking, hyperventilating. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? Oh, they picked up. Oh, crap, I have to talk now. Oh, crap, I just screwed that call up. Okay, next call. Well, here's Kevin. He's, I don't know how many dials he's made in his life, literally making a sandwich. And when he answered, he was like, what's going on? It was so casual. I totally agree with that lifestyle.
Yeah, it's all the tonality and a lot of leaders, what they're getting wrong. And I find this a lot in Australia where you get this real attachment to the outcome. Because in enterprise or when you don't have a massive total addressable market, you feel the pinch a little bit more. That one person wasn't just one person. No, that's one of 100 companies that we're targeting. So there's this challenge to detach from the outcome. But once they do and they realize, hey, I'm just making a sandwich and that I'm trying to, find the 3% that are in the market to buy, the 7% that, have a problem and would consider a solution. I just want to poke at that problem. And the other 30% that know they have a problem but aren't ready to find a solution, I'm just there to pluck them out into our nurture sequence. And I'm not going to change where they are. I'm just sitting there going, I'm just going to tell you what you are. And you'll kind of, based on your response to me, tell me if you're 3%, 7%, or 30%.
Good. So good. What people miss, to your point, sales leaders, they're not focused on tone. If you botch a cold call script, but you're talking to that 3 or 7%, chances are if it's a real need, especially that 3%, they're still going to be down, right? Because you met them at the right time with the right solution. But if you're home.
Yeah, I listened to some calls and genuinely amazed. I'm like, that was the worst cold call. I don't even know where to begin on coaching this call. It was so bad, but they booked a meeting.
If your tone isn't in check, that's where you're going to start to lose people. Even that 3%, if you're calling them, you're anxious, you're whatever, berating or angry, they're 3%, you lost them at the tone. Not what you said, it's how you said it.
And I wonder if with AI, maybe something we'll build into Call Blitz. I wonder if there's a way to record a call with your mate, and maybe just like how we're chatting now. Hey, Jack, what's going on? And it kind of measures your tonality, and then it maps that with a cold call, and it shows how much more formal you're being, or how much harder you're trying to enunciate words. The language changes. How do you, as a BDR lead, get people off their fucking phone? They'll talk like this, and then straight away they're going to call, "Hi, Jack, it's Ricky calling here from Pointer Strategy. How you doing?" And you're like, "Oh my God."
Yeah. Listening to one of my calls last week, and he's from Texas, so he's got a good old Texan voice. It's charming. Like, you actually feel like you know him because he's just his authentic self. And then I heard a cold call recording, and it got buttoned up all of a sudden. I'm like, wait, no. Like, your voice is a gift. Like, you have this charm. Use it. Yeah, to your point, it's calling that out. It's just being like, relax. You can say, I don't care what you say on this phone call. And I've told my reps this before. I want on this next cold call, I don't care what you say. I want you to be as chill as you've ever been on the phone. We will burn through prospects just practicing tone. That's it. I don't care. Like, I'm not coaching script, not coaching openers, whatever, value prop, just like tone in that call. we're going to focus on that till you get past this.
Yeah. How important is role playing in your org?
It has a, no pun intended, it has a role. I think it's great for new hires, but it's not the only thing we should be doing with our reps. And that's where a lot of teams fall into trouble. Oh, great, we're training you how to cold call. Let's do a bunch of role play scenarios. I have a whole blog about this. Most role play scenarios, unrealistic, because most people are too nice to be honest about the feedback at the end. You've got a new hire. You don't want to shut them down and say, hey, actually that sucked. Here's 7 things you need to go work on. That's not an effective way to coach. Or people want to prepare them for the horrible trenches of cold calling. And so during these role plays, they're like mega intense, and people would never say these things in real life. So I think there's a place for them, but they should be a tool within the toolbox of cold call coaching. Amongst the toolbox, you've got role plays, you've got live coaching, which can be done through whatever video platform you want. Ideally, something like a Call Blitz where it's built for you. You've got trial by fire. And honestly, people run into trouble with trial by fire when that's all they're doing. New rep, go call, bye, never talk to you again. It can be effective when used in tandem with the other coaching strategies. And then last is the call recording coaching. Same thing. If you do only call recording coaching, bad idea. But if you put that in tandem with other strategies, you're covering a lot of different learning styles.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, most organizations are just doing that. What they're doing is reviewing a few phone calls and criticizing. Oh, you could have said this. And when the prospect asked this question, you could have answered it more like this. And it's usually around products knowledge or industry knowledge. It's so challenging with the reps that don't have that kind of leadership. One thing I found, no one is a bigger critic of a cold call than the person who made it whatsoever. You just play back a call to someone and say, what did you think of this call? They will give you a list of 10 things. And if you slow them down and say, okay, look, let's scale this back. Like, just give me one thing, just with regards to how you handled this objection. That's all I really care about. Tell me this objection. How do you think you could handle that a bit differently? And they're like, yeah, I should have gone like this as opposed to that. They're like, anyway, if it comes up again, give that a try. But it's really tough to think about that on the cold call. And that's where I feel like role playing gives the repetition that you can practice when somebody says, how did you get my number? They're not sitting there for the first time thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? They know this is how I answer it. It's pretty simple. I'm going to diffuse. I'm going to tell them this line. And if they keep pushing, they won't keep pushing because I'm giving them the answer type thing.
Exactly. Yeah, you can actually, the adventure type stuff where maybe it's a movie and you can like dictate what happens in the movie if you pick path A or path B. You can actually do that with cold calling. You can build a cold call flow chart, and I've done this before, where you have the opener, you have what are the common responses to this opener. And you have this is the response to the opener. Okay, how do you respond to that? And you have like this diagram, this flow chart of when they say this, you say this. When they say this, you say this. Mm-hmm. Now, we would never want to be that rigid, but it's a great framework to understand, especially for new hires. Here are all the possible outcomes of this call. And over time, you're going to learn naturally how to handle when something comes up. And that flow chart is just going to be in your brain. So you can actually formulaically lay out cold calls in all of the scenarios.
Have you seen that Netflix series Kaleidoscope?
I know on Netflix they have the Choose Your Adventure. Is that what that is?
It's a Choose Your Adventures. But here's what's interesting about it. Episode 1 and the final episode are always the same. And then in between, they show it in different orders. Why I love that analogy for a cold call is that the outcome is very often predetermined before you get on that call. Either this person has a pain that is relevant and is in the market for a solution, or they not. And that's before they've picked up the phone. So like, you can change the route to get there, but you can't materially change the outcome. Now, just like Kaleidoscope, they could have lost people in between. They had a few two really shit episodes in a row. People maybe wouldn't even get to the end of the call. So like, you've still got a role to play with that middle chunk, but you can't change the outcome. And very often we don't change the beginning either because our opener is like our opener.
That analogy is money. I'm bringing that back to the team next week. That's gold right there.
Oh, mate, there we go. Taking the snippet, that's the fucking LinkedIn post right there. Yes, 100%. Sorts it for next week. Let's go.
One more comment on the call recording stuff. Did you play rugby growing up?
I played a lot of sports, rugby for a tiny amount of time until I realized that genetically I am not made.
Are you serious with these guns? You're not made for it?
I'm what you call, I'm like Jew tall. So like in my community, I'm like, I'm okay. Like I'm a normal, maybe even above average size height. I go out on a Friday night, I'm like, oh no, like the average height's 6 foot. I'm just, no. These guns, it's a good filter on Zoom.
Right, exactly. Well, I ask because I played what you would call American football growing up. With football, we have practice, we have the game, and then we have game film the next day, every Sunday. So what we're doing with cold calling, when you only provide your team with call recordings, all you're doing is giving them game film to go watch. That's it. And then you send them out to the game, no practice, you're sending them out to the game to get demolished. All they've done is practice game film in their head. All you do is practice role playing, and they're going to show up to the game, probably do pretty well. But are we taking things away? Are we learning? Are we adjusting, adapting? That's the game film part. Where all three come together and it's beautiful is when you bring your team to practice every day, your role plays, you're working together every day. And then you have your game day, you're on the field together. And what Virtual Sales Floor does is it gives you the ability, the coach, to be on the field with your reps. Imagine you sent your rep out to a football game, 1 versus 11, they're going to get demolished. But if they've got their teammates out there with them, they've got the coach out there with them, you're on the field with them. Those live feedback loops, those live iterations. And then after the game, go do your game film. Look at a call recording, watch that tape, make some adjustments, and we're going to pick it up Monday in practice, and we're going to go back into role plays and hitting the phones again. So that's the analogy I use. It's a coaching trifecta. And I think a lot of us are over-indexed on one, if we're over-indexed on any of them at all.
It's such a treat talking to great BDR leaders. And, I hope anyone listening to this does two things. One, if you're a rep, if you don't have a good BDR leader, you are really stunting your early career, without a doubt. Two, if you want to be a BDR leader, to be able to influence other people, you really have to be this professional coach. Like you have to have the goods. Curious, when you just gave that analogy of American football, the one thing I love about Americans is how like all of their national champions are world champions. But anyway, so off topic. Do you call? Like, there's this big, and maybe it's an American culture, lead from the front, but armies would go down pretty quickly if they put all their generals on the front line. Are you calling?
So interesting because that balance is really tough, but it's really important. So I totally agree, right? If all the generals are on the front lines, there's no one behind looking at strategy, looking at the team in general. I'm calling with my team every day. I'm not looking at what's happening 4 weeks from now when this lead pool dries up. What's happening to these two reps? What themes are they noticing across their performance that we can adjust, correct? You have to detach. You have to take a step back. And that should be the default posture for a leader. Take a step back so that while your team is looking down range, you're not looking down range. You're able to look around left to right and be able to adjust and adapt. You have to start there. That does not mean you're above doing the dirty work. And one of the best ways to build trust with your team is get out there, hit the phones, look like a fool, screw up, laugh at yourself, coach yourself, let them coach you. That's how you're going to build trust with your team. That's when they're going to say, wow, he's not better than us. He's with us. He's one of us, right? He's got our backs in a strategic way, detached, but he's willing to dive in with us. So our weekly call blitz, once a week, not a big deal for me to pull up 60 leads, and I call them with the team and let them, give me feedback. I let them watch me stumble and screw up because I'm not perfect at all. I think it's a fun thing for them to see me out in the wild with them.
Man, I love that. It's almost motivating me to get back on the phones.
I think if you're going to over-index, though, it's better to... Difference is, though, are you stepping back because you don't want to be there? And are you stepping back and not supporting your team? Or are you stepping back to support your team? And I think you have to have a very honest check there.
I think that's a good question for people to ask. Like, I'm stepping back because, one, I'm not the BDR team lead, but also because I know as Pointer, as an agency, if it requires me to do that job, I don't have a scalable business. So I need a system that works entirely without me doing that. I'm trying to fulfill a different role. Yes. But yeah, I really do. I appreciate that. And I love that humility. So I think them seeing their leader fail would really help them understand that what we're trying to do here is particularly difficult. There's no genuine experts unless you want to be a Kevin Hop. But most people don't want to be the Kevin Hart. What they want to do is maybe be an account executive or be a VP of sales or become a chief revenue officer or become an entrepreneur like Kevin Hart, but just not cold calling for a living. Yeah. And seeing that failure within your leaders, I think just brings something so different to cold calling. And I love that. I love that you bring that humility to your team where, yeah, I think that would set such an amazing culture where this is a practice.
To your point, if you're mostly calling with your team, one, you're going to miss those strategic shifts that need to happen. Two, your team is going to feel like you don't trust them to do their job. So what I love about what you're saying, Ricky, is your job is to empower other teams to not need you. Ultimately, a good leader will work themselves out of a job. One of my main focuses every day is how do I take what the team relies on me to do and how do I empower them to go do it so they don't need me anymore? Example, when I first started at Fourth, I was looking at all our cadences, rewriting cadences, monitoring them, managing them. And we got to a point where I tapped on one of our reps, Nick, and Nick now owns cadences for the team. Nick is now becoming an expert in that. New line item for him. He's a leader. He gets to give back to the team, and I get to go focus on other things. So it's a win-win when leaders can step back and empower their team to lead and take over stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. What I've found strategically is a lot of things that we thought were important didn't really have a material impact. Cadences is a good example. The message in the email, super key. Any particular tactic, like an email referencing a call or a call referencing an email, like that as a combination makes a material impact. But otherwise, throw in some calls, throw in some emails, throw in some LinkedIn, throw in more calls. Every cadence kind of worked out the same.
It's good enough. I listened to Jocko Willink. I don't know if people know him or not, but he's big into leadership. He always says that if I can't explain the difference between your plan and my plan, or I can't explain why mine is better in a very simple, clear way, we're going with your plan because it's going to be good enough. And if it's good enough, it's minimally viable, then we're going to run with it. Because you're more bought in, you're going to develop, you're going to learn, and you're going to hold yourself accountable to your plan more than you are to my plan.
Now tell me, I don't want to get too into it because I could talk to you for hours about BDR leadership. One of the biggest challenges I've found is it doesn't matter how good you are on the phone. It doesn't matter how good your messaging is. None of that matters if you're calling the wrong people. Tell me about how you enable your reps through research, through the list building process. Because to me, that's in some ways, you could put the best rep on a bad list. They're going to get no outcomes.
I don't have the master answer here. This is something we actively struggle with at my company. Now, what I try to do for my reps is feed them. I try to always have on our Salesforce dashboards your total lead list. Here are the different buckets, right? Where they're from, what kind of leads they are. Looks like, at a high level, you have 2,000 leads and there's 100 marketing leads, 200, whatever. I try to feed them leads so that they can go do what they do best, which is call, outbound, research, all of that. So I don't know if that's the right approach or the wrong approach. I haven't even considered the pros and cons of that. But my goal is to feed them those leads so that they don't have to worry about where are my next leads coming from. So I don't know if that's a good or bad plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the point of this podcast. It's interesting to know that you having these same challenges that everyone else is having. Broadly, it sounds like the strategic approach that you're taking is similar to ours, where it's centralized research. We've actually gone to the point now where our reps don't necessarily have access to the data tool, like ZoomInfo or whichever one we were using. We've centralized that. So instead of having 6 licenses for ZoomInfo, we'll have 1, and then we'll have but 6 different tools, and we have a centralized researcher. They put in a request saying, I need a list of 100 of these kinds of people. The research team goes, finds it, enriches it, validates emails, phone numbers, whatever, sends it back to the rep the next day.
Interesting. I like that approach. I think if we can mature at that pace, I think that's probably where we'll end up. And it's not to take power away from the reps. It's to empower them to go focus on what matters.
It might be a unique challenge for Pointer. If I have 10 reps, they're working on 10 different companies. They're working on 10 different ideal client profiles. They're working on 10 different industries entirely. Some of them are very simple, where we're just doing firmographics. I find, VPs of sales at companies that look like this. And some of them are super complicated. And I found that I had to start hiring specifically for a research skill set, which was very different to a cold calling skill set or a sales skill set. And we weren't finding a unicorn. So our best rep maybe was just bad at research. Like now what? We've got this machine and it's broken because of this one little cog. Our ramp times were significantly longer, as half of it was showing people how to find reps, find leads. Anyway, this isn't about us, mate. If somebody wanted to get hold of you, they wanted to learn about Call Blitz, or they just want to chat to you about BDR leadership, Where did they find you?
LinkedIn is where you find anyone these days. I'm honored to help out wherever I can. Again, I'm not perfect. I'm certainly going to screw up a lot more in my career. Young leaders, so many leadership lessons to learn, both in the BDR leader seat and in the founder seat, trying to launch a company. I think I've been able to get here because people have supported me, believed in me, encouraged me. And the least I can do is give that blessing back to others and help them out. Whether it's career advice or any questions, anything I can do to be helpful, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to meet.
Thank you for that. But now let's get a little bit of tachlis here. What does a person look like right now that if they identify as such, they should go get on Coreblitz? Just download it. It's free, right? To jump on.
Free to jump on. It's, I think, like 9 clicks to get started, from creating an account all the way to connecting your dialer. And what it looks like is a Zoom, so super familiar. You're basically jumping into a Zoom, connects to your dialer, and all of your dialer activity is automated for you. So you're not having to mute, unmute, share audio, unshare audio. All you're doing is dialing. If you or your buddies get into a connect, 1 click away from hearing that live conversation. So you can go to callblitz.com, hit try free now, and it'll have you 10 minutes later dialing in there.
So I so strongly encourage companies to jump on and do that. Even if you just wanted to do it for fun, once a month, do it. It's free, which Jack will have to talk about. That's pretty crazy. You know, it's free with some limitations, but those limitations aren't to use it. Jump on, give it a try, and you will see organically better morale. You'll see increased cross-training. You'll see more motivation from the team members. It does bring in elements of accountability because you are accountable to bring your best self to your team. You're accountable to also get some calls in so that they can learn from you, and you're accountable to give that feedback to them so that they can improve. Like, it just does such wonders with, you know, all you got to do is type in coreblitz.com. So, mate, really appreciate having you on the show. And I'd love to chat to you more, particularly about that international expansion, the difference between your reps in the US, Australia, and the UK. But we'll have to save that for another time. I know it's getting late there on a Friday.
Love what you're doing. You're helping managers like myself in the US manage these teams that are really hard to manage when they're a globe over. But Ricky, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, man. I was able to help a bit.
We'll chat to you soon.